Anthony Ginsberg, based in California, hailing from South Africa. He gives us the best of both worlds. Donald Trump making headlines all around the world for what he was saying in Greenland. We'll find out more from Anthony on that one. A rebound in the stock market as a consequence of it. And South Africa aligning finally against the climate change lobby that has caused so much problems in various parts of the world. We're starting to put South Africa first rather than the rich countries. Lots to talk about, Anthony, but let's begin with your president, Donald Trump. He's the man that Americans either love or hate. Well, I guess after yesterday, he spent an hour addressing the worthies in Davos, got a standing ovation at the end, certainly what we could see on the television screens, and then had a pretty interesting engagement in the questions and answers. Once again, Trump appears to have applied the taco trade. Trump always chickens out. This time he's dropped the tariffs on Greenland. He's not going to invade Greenland as he suggested at some point. Surely at some point, people are going to look at this and say, come on, can you ever believe this guy? He just negotiates. He's negotiating a position. And now he's got, it seems, the acceptance to put military bases all over Greenland, as many as he wants, as long as he doesn't invade and take over the island, which was probably his idea right in the beginning.
Yes, Alec, great to join you. Look, Trump's bark has always been bigger than his bite. My old friends on Wall Street, where I worked 30-odd years ago, they've learned to basically not take all of these negotiating tactics too seriously. I still recall going to Trump Tower in the 1990s, right after his book, Art of the Deal, came out, and everything was very gaudy and flashy and gold. But when you actually got into the Trump organization, I knew a person working there, it was actually a pretty normal place, believe it or not. So there's a lot of showy stuff out there. I guess when you get to the crux of it, the Greenland deal looks fundamentally a deal with NATO that is struck where America will have first right of refusal on mineral usage and also the military usage across Greenland. America used to have up to 25 different bases on Greenland. Today they only have one, maybe a second one now. So watch this space. I wouldn't get too concerned that there's no invasion going on. I think he was trying to negotiate with NATO, frankly, that America would have first dibs on development. And he believes that America has the resources infrastructurally to actually build out the infrastructure needed in Greenland. This all comes back to his Arctic protectionism. He wants to protect the Arctic, and he looks at the Chinese and the Russians as competing Arctic nations.
Oh, interestingly enough, The Art of the Deal is probably a new bestseller since Trump came back into office, because he's running with that copybook almost identical to what he explained in that.
Yeah. Can I just say, on Wall Street, when I was there years back, before I started my mutual fund business, the guys always say, Ginsberg, if you're an accountant, look at the debits and the credits. But yes, he's not everybody's cup of tea, and we know he can be a pain in the tush to negotiate with. But on the credit side, the economy in America is actually going gangbusters. We've actually had almost a 4% growth in GDP for the third quarter. There's a lot of interesting economic improvements that he's made here. For example, he's now trying to cut the credit card interest charges down to 10% from these usury rates of higher than 27, 28%. Unemployment is around 4%. The stock market recently hit an all-time high. So there are some very positive tailwinds. As you know, under President Biden, there were almost no M&A or acquisition deals going on. Today, you hear about Netflix buying Warner Brothers. There's a lot more activity. And I can tell you, we're miles from any recession. If you travel in the States, it's incredibly busy. All the airports, I've been on the road quite a bit recently. They're expecting 3+% GDP growth, Alec, again this year.
It is an interesting point, because the Trump message seems to be getting through even to South Africa. We have had Pretoria kicking back against anything that Trump has proposed. And now we hear yesterday that Sputla Ramakgopa, our electricity minister, is stepping away from that loan, $8.5 billion COP loan, which required the closure of coal power stations. A big move for South Africa, given that Trump has been banging on that drum for a long time, saying that these energy policies have been bankrupting countries, or certainly destroying their ability to produce reasonably priced electricity. And we in South Africa have been part of that whole, we swallowed that Kool-Aid. Maybe there is a bit of a realization there that could assist the country. What's your take on that?
Yes. Can I just say regarding Davos, because I have friends who are there currently, there's a new world order going on there because the Europeans who have really embraced the green energy deal, they've really been put under the kibosh by Trump. The Trump and the Republicans are very much in favor of regular energy usage, which is required. We talk about Jensen Huang and NVIDIA and the AI 5-layer cake. Energy is one of the key components of AI. Yes, you've got all the other issues of supercomputers and semiconductors, but actually without energy, it just doesn't work. So Trump's actually laughing in the face of the Europeans, saying, guys, you want American protection, you want us to help with NATO, but then you're going off and having strange energy policies. When Ukraine was invaded by the Russians, of course, we all know how Europe really suffered, Alec. And I've got friends in Australia who say the same thing, that they're paying enormous energy prices down in Australia and then exporting all their iron ore cheaply, essentially, to the Chinese. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I know South Africa, for instance, has a big trade deficit with the BRICS. And the Americans don't understand, why would South Africa not want to trade, whether it's through AGOA or more closely with the United States, where you actually beneficiate cars and, the citrus areas. There's a lot of value add. It's very different to the trade you do with the BRICS. The Chinese, frankly, have been dumping cheap goods in the US for years. And actually, the biggest car manufacturing plant in the world was supposed to be built just south of the San Diego Mexican border under President Biden, and Trump has stopped that. And I'm told in South Africa you can get a lot of cheap cars now that are Chinese. But the question is this the kind of trade that South Africa really needs? I just saw your APSA, I know you're a former APSA employee. There was an APSA PMI report that showed South Africa contracting at the low, I think the worst numbers, the PMI in 5 years for manufacturing and factory output. So I think South Africa has to be very, very careful about marrying its foreign policy, frankly, with its trade and industrial policy. And America should certainly be a huge trade partner for South Africa going forward.
Just to correct you on APSA, I've spent 5% of my career outside of journalism, and that was at a very senior position at APSA, where I couldn't believe, it was eye-watering how much they were prepared to pay. You come from journalism, on the one hand, you get, well, we know what journalists are paid, perhaps many will say justifiably, whereas I enjoyed my time at APSA and I learned a lot, but yeah, not really. That was 30, 40 years ago. But let's get back to that very important point of the impact that Donald Trump is having, his economic policies are having on the way that people in the world are actually looking at things. It's almost like our guys in Pretoria have been, I mentioned it earlier, drinking the Kool-Aid and believing a lot of the propaganda that was coming out, which was not to our benefit. Our country has got so many things going for it, but we're on the back foot here. We are wanting to trade with those who are benefiting from us, i.e. where we have a trade deficit, and not wanting to trade with those who are giving us where we have a massive trade surplus, i.e. the United States. But maybe the story from Sputla Ramachapa is a sign that things could be, we could be sobering up.
Well, I think South Africa does need to protect its manufacturing industry. I'm worried about Xi'an and Temu and these guys basically flooding the markets. The Americans have actually now blocked essentially electric vehicles from China. They can't believe that the Europeans are still allowing a flood of cheap Chinese goods. And the American perspective essentially is trade with us. We're deal makers. Half of Trump's cabinet, frankly, are ex-Wall Streeters, from the Treasury Secretary Besant to the Commerce Secretary Lutnick. These guys all want to get deals done. I really believe South Africa can thread the needle on BEE and the EWC, expropriation without compensation, to be part of AGOA, or at least get a trade deal so that you're not hurting at 30% amongst the highest tariffs in the world. It just doesn't make sense for an open economy like South Africa. I really think you can thread the needle, but frankly, without an ambassador in DC, I know we've talked about it previously, all the other countries, the Japanese, the Koreans, they all have brought not just top-level ambassadors, but also regular trade delegations. So I think hopefully things are changing. It's a positive that the Americans want to do deals. They're open for business.
You mentioned Davos earlier. It is a place that I've attended many times. It would have been my 20th year this year, but it seems it's so American-centric that those from other parts of the world were knocked down the pecking order, myself included. It is the way that it goes. But I do recall when we had Kgalema Motlanthe very briefly as the South African president. I was in the room when he was talking just after arriving, and he had, let's call it Plan A. When he left, he had the opposite of Plan A, Plan Z. His eyes had been opened. And that's the big benefit, perhaps, of Davos, is that you come away from it seeing how the new world order exists and how you should adjust your own positions to align with it. Let's hope that that happens this time around, because South Africa certainly needs a new way of looking at things if we are to get this depressing 15-year contraction of GDP per capita reversed.
Well, that's why the friends of mine who are in the White House, they don't understand why South Africa wouldn't want to engage, get a trade deal done, and actually grow the relationship. They've just sent their ambassador down to Pretoria. I believe South Africa, hopefully in the next month or two, will also engage with an ambassador. You really need to grow South Africa's presence here. The country is not well represented, sadly, here. We don't hear much on the positive side, media-wise. It's really an afterthought. The guys want to get a deal done. I actually understand that not just Simonstown is empirical for them and important, but they also look at the rare earth minerals coming out of South Africa and broadly the whole Southern African region for them. They view South Africa as a linchpin. So they really do want to engage. I think that's the positive side. They don't understand why South Africa feels that BRICS is going to be such a wonderful trade deal for them, because most of the BRICS guys are basically huge exporters, whether it's the Indians, the Chinese, and others, the Brazilians. They may not buy a lot of South African goods. I believe the trade deficit is growing continually with BRICS. And just lastly, the Americans, they say to me, Anthony, you guys need to absorb 600,000 new jobs a year per annum there. You're only creating about 100,000 new jobs a year. There was a recent unemployment statistic that was mentioned to me by some very clever guys close to the White House. They said to me, half of South Africa's unemployment are folks who are school leavers or folks who've never worked before. Another quarter of the unemployment numbers in South Africa are folks who haven't worked in 5+ years. So surely there's a structural problem there, and America can help, certainly with infrastructure spend and creating incentives. A question for you is, why would Americans come and set up a manufacturing plant over the next 10, 15 years if there aren't incentives, if they're hit with these headwinds such as EWC or the broad-based Black economic empowerment? Just quickly, Trump here has created massive tax incentives to boost infrastructure spending in AI and other areas. For example, they can deduct their CapEx, capital expenditure, within the first year now in terms of depreciation against taxes. There's a big tax reduction act, this big, beautiful bill that he passed. So just two other quick things that they've done to reduce housing prices in America and credit card costs. There's a whole affordability aspect so that the Blackstones, the big private equity groups, no longer are going to be allowed to buy up thousands, if not millions, of American homes and drive the prices up, which happened under his predecessors. So Trump on the economic side understands the pain. He was voted in, as you and I know, really as I would say, by the working class Americans, who really was a backlash against the Clintons and many of the elites in Washington who frankly had not cared too much about the working class. These are the manufacturing states of Wisconsin, in the Midwest. You've got Ohio, Illinois, which essentially all went Republican, and these are generally tossed-up states. So it was a revenge of the working class that really brought Trump into power. And by the way, some of my South African government friends, they said, Anthony, well, we'll just sit it out till the midterms in November, and then Trump's going to lose the midterms. He probably will lose, but he's not going to be a lame duck president. This guy doesn't go away. He's got more energy than the Energizer Bunny, and he may actually be followed by J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio. So for South Africans to think that we just sit this guy out for another 9 months or 10 months, and then you get the Democrats coming. The Democrats have got their own wobbles and huge problems here, which we can talk about as well.
And interesting developments on the American political side, and definitely Mark Carney had a very powerful speech. But the part of it that stuck with me is that we need to see the world as it is, not as we want it to be. And that seems to be a problem that we in South Africa have had for a long time. And perhaps at last we are learning to see the world as it is. But let's talk about your area of expertise. Not to say that you don't understand America and South African relations, but Gins Global, your company invests in or is an avenue for investment into index funds. Primarily, though, you focused on the tech side, and I keep getting your information which says another new record that has been set by the US markets, particularly tech stocks. And then you have a look at people in South Africa who are somewhat removed saying, but surely this tech stock bubble has to burst at some point in time. How do you respond to that kind of worry?
Right. So for those of us who've been around a while, if you look at 1999, 2000, at that time, the tech bubble that they called internet bubble had PE ratios sky high in the 50s and 60s. Actually, the average PE ratio was around 50 times earnings. We're only at about 21 times earnings on our tech megatrend ETF that's been on the London Stock Exchange over 7 years. We're actually just setting up a feeder fund for South Africans to more easily access it in rands via living annuities and RAs. What we've tried to do is to show people how to invest in tech beyond the Mag 7, because, Alec, even the NASDAQ is narrow. Half of the NASDAQ is dominated literally by the Mag 7 and 2 other stocks. If you add Tesla, for example, and you add Netflix in there. What's very exciting for us is the convergence between AI, cybersecurity, cloud companies. In fact, cloud is growing at 29% annualized growth. It's really a cousin to AI. And ultimately, there's a lot of overlap between social media, defense tech. We even have added as one of our themes. So we equally weight these stocks, Alex, so we don't have this massive overweight where you have 10 stocks representing half the mutual fund, which typically, unfortunately, in the active fund management world, often you'll have 7 to 10 stocks literally dominating the portfolio. We've seen some big names in the UK and elsewhere really struggling of late. So we've equally weighted, it gets rebalanced across these 10 sub-themes. So we added, because of drone technology and what you've seen in the Middle East and with the Ukraine-Russia war, drone technology is a huge growing area. Even cybersecurity companies are now getting into the defense world. The Pentagon is spending a lot more money on third-party defense. So my main point is it's not just a US story, it's a global story. The US, incidentally, in that megatrend ETF is only 55% weighting. We've got Israel, we've got places such as Japan, Korea, even China. We don't stay away from the likes of Tencent, of course, and Alibaba. These guys are going to have monopolies in their internet because the Americans can't get in. Uber has been kicked out. Google over the years have been kicked out of China. So essentially, we've got about a 10% weighting still in China because of those.
But why, Anthony, why? Rather than talking your own book, but just tell us what your response is to people when they say there's a tech bubble.
Not only are the valuations in our own fund around 20 times earnings, which is not by historical standards enormous, but these data centers that come in for a lot of criticism with the massive spend, this is a huge infrastructure build out, and there will be winners and losers. There's no doubt about it. But they're 90% leased already, these data centers, Alex. So when folks say, wow, they're building out crazy amount of 20, 30, 40 data centers, TSMC, this is Taiwan Semiconductor, are now building more in the US, as is Intel. So we're onshoring more robotics here all the time. The reason we're positive is because Trump's policies, interestingly, by putting the kibosh on NAFTA, where a lot of the American manufacturers could be lazy. They were doing labor-intensive automobile manufacturing in Mexico, for instance, for years and years, while BMW and Mercedes and the Japanese were far ahead in automation. Now it's finally being forced to basically remove part of the NAFTA story from Canada and Mexico, and onshore with robotics and AI. So there's a big convergence and a huge infrastructure spend. I mentioned to you that we're expecting more M&A activity as well here. The small caps and the mid caps in our tech area, we have 140 holdings, for example, in that tech fund. Many of them below the mega caps are trading in the teens in terms of their multiples, their price to book, price to earnings. So yes, the Mag 7 are well over 30 times earnings, and it's expensive. I would be the first to admit it. But it's the next level down. Expect a lot more M&A now that Biden's no longer there. The Federal Trade Commission, the SEC, these are all run by Wall Street or business-friendly folks. The red book, or what I should say, the red tape is dissipating, and there are going to be a lot more deals being done. Goldman Sachs hired the largest number of new managing directors at the end of last year. So that just shows you the expectation for more corporate activity here.
It's so interesting, the point, because there are so many of these dots that can be joined. Fabrizio Bloisi, the CEO of Prosus, was bemoaning, and in Davos, he was bemoaning the fact that Europe has got these archaic laws where they force the big companies to get smaller. Whereas in the United States, they are giving capitalism a free run. And it does appear until Europe changes its rules, it's going to get eaten by the Yanks.
Well, there's a reason why I guess we talk about a global tech, and more than half of the companies generally are American. I will say the leaders in robotics are the Asian companies because of the demographics, as you know well. The Japanese population is shrinking, and in Korea as well. So those guys have been way ahead in terms of the robotics. So the Americans are going to actually be importing robots from Korea and Japan, for example. But you're right. Prosus's CEO is spot on. There's too much red tape and regulations. And actually the lending that you see here in America, the venture capital in Silicon Valley, you just don't see it. I know your friend David Shapiro was saying the typical banks in South Africa are not VC lenders. They don't maybe do a lot in this particular space. And also the cost of capital is still the lowest in the world in America. By being the reserve currency, the dollar, America has this inherent advantage of literally paying 2 to 3% for loans. I mean, the prime rate here is less than probably half, maybe a third of South Africa's prime rate. So capital is much, much more in abundance, and it's a lot cheaper here as well.
Okay, so you've given us a really good Buy America story. What are investors doing, though? Are they, in your opinion, going to continue buying America into the year ahead, given that we have seen this huge run since 2022 now?
Yeah, most of the Wall Street players believe there will be about a 10% gain on the S&P this year. So they're looking at about a 7,700 up to 8,000 on the S&P. It's just below 7,000 currently. The interesting part is there's a broadening out in the stock market beyond just tech. So things like healthcare, banking, consumer staples, that, and particularly small caps. We don't talk, you and I, much about the Russell 2000 index. There's also an S&P 600 small cap index. Those small cap indexes are now hitting new highs almost on a weekly basis. So they've actually really dramatically caught up. For years, it was really a Mag 7 mega cap story. But there is a global story here. The weaker dollar helps Microsoft on their export earnings. It helps Google. These guys are earning 50%, sometimes beyond that, Meta as well, in terms of foreign earnings. So they're generating more dollars when they bring back euros currently. So I know a lot of South Africans are happy with the strong rand, and maybe it's a positive. I think South Africa has been fortunate, obviously, in the mining space and platinum. But for Americans, I don't think Trump's that upset that the dollar has lost 10%, let's say, against the euro. It's not such a bad thing for large Fortune 500 exporters here.
Anthony, you are coming to the BizNews conference in March. It's less than 2 months away. You'll be part of our investor masterclass, which is the first half of the day. It's the full morning on Tuesday the 10th. What message are you going to be bringing from California to tell South Africans who do appreciate the fact that you've got your finger on the pulse, both with the relations between South Africa and the US, which you've made a particular area of interest for yourself, and of course, with the way that stocks are performing in the United States and on Wall Street?
Right. Well, I would say don't let Trump upset you too much about what's going on in the US. There are a lot of positive things just below the surface. So yes, Greenland's the topic of the day, and Venezuela was just a few weeks ago. And these are the headlines politically. But frankly, the economy is going gangbusters. If predictions are right, we may be looking at a 3.5% to 4% GDP growth, Alec, which for a industrialized first world economy is massive. South Africa, I just wish could even get to half that rate. Hopefully SA will get to 2% this year. So the per capita income is growing in the US, and the stock market is broadening out. It's very true that it was a very narrow bull market the last 2.5, 3 years, but watch out now for the financials, the healthcare stocks, consumer stocks, industrials, and these small caps. They actually have not run until recently, and many of their PE ratios are well below 20. So it's not true that America is overpriced. It's probably the Mag 7 that give it a bad name, but there's a lot of good value out there. And just lastly, don't ignore the fact that South Africa could be doing a lot more trade with the US. Send an ambassador here who can speak business, and I really think you can thread the needle and get a deal done on AGOA and getting those tariffs down by at least half, down to, let's say, 15% from 30%.
Well, great advice from someone who's on the ground. And just to recap or to support the Russell 2000 index, last week, for the 11th successive week, was outperforming the S&P 500. In other words, the small caps that you're talking about have done better on average for 11 weeks in a row now, and it certainly doesn't seem to be stopping. Anthony Ginsberg is the founder of Gins Global. I'm Alec Hogg from biznews.com.